We're going to be in Luke chapter 5, verses 1 through 11 this morning. And so I invite you to turn to that passage. Luke 5, verses 1 through 11. So how would you feel if someone came to your place of business where you work and started telling you how to do your job? And, they weren't your supervisor. They weren't someone who worked in your field and they didn't know anything about what you do. And what if they told you, okay, now drop whatever you're doing right now and do something else? What would you do? What would your reaction be? Would you do it? Would you do what they said? Well, you see, that's exactly the situation that faced Simon and his business partners in Luke chapter 5. Verses 1 through 11. And the clincher of the story is the guy who comes in and starts telling them what to do is Jesus. So let's look at that passage, Luke chapter 5, verses 1 through 11. One day, as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, the people were crowding around him, listening to the word of God. He saw at the water's edge 2 boats, left there by the fishermen who were washing their nets. He got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon, and asked him to put out a little from the shore. Then he sat down and taught the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch." Simon answered, "Master, we worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I will let down the nets." When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners on the other boat to come help them, and they came and filled both boats so full that they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, "Go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man." For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken. And so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. Then Jesus said to Simon, "Don't be afraid. From now on you will fish for people." So they pulled their boats up on the shore, left everything, and followed him. A little bit of background in this passage. This is a portion of the Galilean ministry. The Galilean ministry in the Jesus ministry in Galilee begins in chapter 4, verse 14, and it goes through to chapter 9, verse 50. That's when he, in 9:50, is when he turns his face toward Jerusalem and begins to move toward his final week in Jerusalem. This is the early portion of the Galilean ministry, and it's a time of growing popularity for Jesus. And we kind of see that in this event this morning. Last week we saw that Jesus returned to Galilee, that he preached in his home synagogue in Nazareth, and he met with kind of a mixed reaction. I wouldn't say a mixed reaction, it was a hostile reaction. They took him to the edge of the cliff and were going to throw him off. So yeah, that's kind of an extreme reaction, I would say. He goes from Nazareth to Capernaum, and there he begins a teaching and healing ministry in Capernaum. Capernaum becomes sort of his headquarters through the Galilean ministry. And Capernaum is a city down along the shore of the Lake Galilee. While he's at Capernaum, we have the story in verses 31 through 37 of chapter 4 of him healing in the synagogue, casting out a demon, and then going to Simon's home and healing Simon's mother-in-law. And so that tells us some information. Simon had a wife because he had a mother-in-law. Yet that's kind of the way it works. So Simon he's a family guy. And we also know from this story that Jesus and Simon have a previous relationship. Because if you look at the story, say in the Gospel of Mark, of the call of the disciples, you kind of get the picture that Jesus is just walking along the shore of Galilee. He sees these fishermen, and he just calls them, and they just drop everything and follow him without any previous connection. But here we see that Jesus has a previous relationship with Simon. So this is not a story about Simon suddenly changing from not knowing Jesus to knowing Jesus and then giving up everything and following him. This is a story of someone who already considers himself to be a disciple, but yet is called to a deeper commitment. And this is that turning point in Simon's life. So then we have more healings and teachings in the Galilean ministry around the area of Capernaum. And then in our verses this morning, we have what we call the calling of the first disciples. The first four, Simon, Andrew, James, and John. And it's a story, as I've said before, a story of a change of direction, a change of vocation. They go from being full-time fishermen to, for lack of a better term, full-time disciples. So let's look at the passage. We want to look at it piece by piece and get an idea of what it's about. So first we see the setting, and that's in verses 1 through 3. In verse 1, we're told that Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret. Now, Gennesaret is just another name for Galilee. It was called the Sea of Tiberias. It was called the Sea of Galilee. It was called the Lake of Gennesaret. It had many different names. Gennesaret means harp, and it's because if you look at a map of the Sea of Galilee, it's kind of shaped like a harp, and so it was called Gennesaret, harp. Just another name for the Sea of Galilee. Jesus is teaching. We see his great popularity in that people are crowding around him and listening to him. And we can kind of picture this incident where the people are crowding around him and Jesus kind of get pushed back and closer to the lake shore, to the edge of the lake. And he sees two boats belonging to the fishermen, Peter and Andrew. Now, Andrew's not mentioned here, but it's implied that there's more than just Peter. Peter and Andrew and their partners, James and John, and they are cleaning their nets. So they've been out working, and now here they are done, and they're cleaning their nets, and they would be washing off, the fish scales and all the junk, and also repairing any rips or places in the nets that needed to be repaired. So they're washing their nets, and Jesus says to Simon, "Hey, Simon, can I borrow your boat?" And Simon says, "Yeah, sure, let's do it." Which implies to me that there's a previous relationship there. Simon knows Jesus. Simon is even to some degree committed to Jesus as a teacher. And so, okay, sure, Lord, let's go. Master, let's go out. And Jesus sits in the boat, and he uses the boat as a pulpit, so he can get a little distance from the crowd, and now everybody can hear him, and sort of that natural amphitheater effect, the lake shore as Jesus speaks from the water, and his voice would carry across the water. So it's sort of a natural amplifier, And Jesus is teaching, and he finishes his teaching session. We don't know what he said. There's no record in any of the Gospels of what he taught on this occasion. So he's done teaching. He's finished. And he turns to Simon and he says, "Hey, I want to go fishing. Let's go out in deeper water and let down the nets for a catch." Now, you got to get the picture here. Jesus is who? He's a carpenter. And he's telling a fisherman how to fish. You guys who are farmers, you know what you're doing. Nobody knows your job better than you do. So how do you react when someone comes and tells you how to farm? Some government wonk. You know what I mean? I know, yeah, you know what I mean. And they come and tell you, you're not doing it the right way. So Jesus says to Simon, "Let's go out and fish." And Simon says to Jesus, "Hey, Lord Jesus, this isn't the way it's done. We fish at night. That's the right time to fish because the water cools, the fish come up to feed, and they gather in the schools, and that's when we catch them. You don't catch fish during the day, and you don't catch fish in deep water. They're not there. You catch them in the shallows. But because you say so, I will let down the nets. Again, this implies to me that there's a previous relationship between Peter and Jesus, and Peter recognizes and respects Jesus as a teacher. And he calls him, in fact, master there. And that's a Greek word which was used to refer to a rabbi. And it implies authority. And it connotes someone who has authority over another. So Peter is, or Simon, who will, of course, is Peter. Simon is, by calling him master, is saying that he respects the authority of Jesus. He's kind of places himself under Jesus. So he's, in some sense, a learner, in some sense, a disciple, in that he listens to Jesus teach, he respects Jesus' teaching. So he's heard Jesus preach before. And Simon obeys, even though the command doesn't make any sense from his point of view. From a fisherman's point of view, this makes no sense. But because Jesus, whose authority he respects, says, go out and let down the nets, Peter says, okay, because you say so, we'll do it, but I just want you to know this isn't going to work. Simon has already committed himself to Jesus as a teacher, someone who must be heard and obeyed. In verse 6, and we have the miracle. When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So the nets can't handle them. The word caught there in the Greek is a word that means to enclose, and that's the method of fishing. They fished with nets, and the way they did that is they would encircle the fish with a net and then pull it up from the middle. It was, I think they call that sign fishing, and they would pull the net up and catch the fish. So they put the nets down and they start to pull them up, and there are so many fish in it that the nets begin to break. Luke is using this description to emphasize how great the miracle was. Here is someone who knows, as far as they know, nothing about fishing. The carpenter who says, let's go out and fish, and he knows more about fishing than the fishermen do. Listen to me, folks. Jesus knows more about your way of life and your job than you do. God knows more about what you do than you know yourself. So Jesus tells them to go out. They go out, and because they obey him, there's this abundant blessing. And it says in verse 7, they signaled to their partners to come and help them. This would be James and John. They were business partners, we see in verse 10. And they filled both of the boats so full of fish that the boats began to sink. Again, there Luke is emphasizing the size of the catch. The fishermen, now remember, these men had fished all night. These are professional fishermen. This is how they make their living. They're not just out there fishing for sport. They're not out there fishing to catch a few fish to eat. They're fishing to sell the fish. This is how they make their living and care for their families. And those professional fishermen fished all night and caught nothing. The best efforts of man produced no results. And then Jesus comes and he gives a simple command, and there's an abundant provision. Jesus here shows his control over nature. I read one fellow who said, Jesus looked out over the water and his sharp eyes saw that there was a school of fish out there. Well, Peter's a fisherman. Wouldn't he have seen that there was a school of fish out there? I believe what happened is Jesus called the fish. He has control over nature. He said, Put out the nets, come on, fish. I mean, if the guy can calm a storm, he can call fish. Some of you who are fishermen, you'd like to be able to do that, wouldn't you? That doesn't work. But it worked for Jesus. So it shows his control over nature. It also shows his abundant provision. God can take care of you. And maybe in the back of Simon's mind, maybe this is speculation on my part, but maybe in his mind he's been toying with following Jesus full time. But he's thinking, but if I do that, how am I going to take care of my family? How am I going to make a living? And Jesus demonstrates with this miracle, I can take care of you. Don't worry about how you make a living, Peter. Follow me, I can take care of you. And then we see the response in verses 8 through 11. And the focus is on Simon. He's the leader of the group. And here for the first time in verse 8, he's called Simon Peter. You notice that? Just briefly, just one verse, Simon Peter. Everywhere else, he's called Simon. And this is Luke's way of pointing out to us who this man will become. Peter, the leader of the church. The number one apostle. The guy who the Catholics look to as the first pope. I kind of question that, but nevertheless, here's this guy who was a fisherman, the plainest of human beings, and he becomes, in history, this man we remember as a great leader and a great spiritual individual. Peter, Simon, here, seeing what has happened and just being overwhelmed by the miracle, it says he fell down at Jesus' knees. Remember, Jesus is sitting in the boat, so he falls down at Jesus' knees and he says, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." The word Lord here, now some people look at that and they say, this is Peter acknowledging the divinity of Christ. Maybe. The word Lord is the Greek word kurios. It is a word that is used in everyday speech to refer to someone of high authority, say an emperor or a king. A person of high authority. It may be a recognition of Jesus' deity, or it may not. We don't really know for sure. The word kurios is the word that's used in the Greek translation of the Old Testament in place of the name Yahweh. So that may be what Peter intended, or he may just be recognizing Jesus' authority as a person of high authority. Peter here maybe has not come to the full realization of who Jesus is. It will be Peter later on who will say, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God," who will make that confession. But here Peter is just sort of nibbling around the edges of that and beginning to understand who Jesus is. He recognizes Jesus as a person of high authority, as a person that is to be respected and obeyed. He recognizes that God is with Jesus, that Jesus is a holy person. And what is the proper response to an encounter with the holy? Well, we see it all through the Bible. Every time an angel appears or every time the Lord shows himself, the people fall down on their face before him, and the angel or the Lord always ends up having to say, "Don't be afraid." Don't be afraid. Because the natural response of a sinful human being to an encounter with the holy is fear. And that's the natural, and that's the proper response. I have a little trouble, my friends, sometime with our approach to God. And in some ministries, I don't want to name any, but the idea of just coming to God as our friend and buddy, and he's my pal, and he's the old guy up in the sky, my old grandfather up in the sky, and me and Jesus, we're just buddies and pals. And he is our friend, but he's also God. And we need to respect that. And when we come into contact with the holy, when we understand who Jesus is, that he is holy, our first response is, he's holy. And I'm a sinner. Remember Isaiah? He was just doing his job in the temple one day. And he saw the Lord in the temple, high and lifted up, seated on the throne. And what did Isaiah say? Hey, God, good to see ya. Give me 5. No. He says, woe is me, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and I have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. That's the proper response. And Peter falls before Jesus and he says, go away from me. I'm not even worthy to be in your presence because I am a sinful man. Peter recognized that God was working through Jesus. He recognized Jesus' authority and he realizes he's not worthy to even be in his presence. And he confesses his sinfulness. Verse 9 says, he and all his companions were astonished by the catch they had taken. It made an impression upon them. And in verse 10 it says, particularly, that's what it means in the Greek, particularly or especially James and John, Simon's partners. And we learn that they're business partners. But James and John, Simon and Andrew, who's unnamed here, are astonished. The word astonished in the English, it comes from the word stone, and it literally means to be made stone. And the word that comes from in the Greek is a word which means to be so amazed, so awestruck that you can't move. You're paralyzed with amazement. He said they were astonished. They were made like stone. Literally in the Greek, the first word is amazement. Or the first word is astonished. Astonished! They were seized. They were seized with astonishment. That's a good word. Seized with astonishment. James and John, Peter and Andrew. And then verse 11, Jesus replies with the standard angelic response, do not be afraid. That's I don't know how many times that's repeated in the scripture, but it always strikes me whenever somebody comes into contact with God or with an angel, first words out of the holy being's mouth is always, don't be afraid. And then he tells Peter, he gives Peter a little glimpse into the future. He says, Peter, from now on, from this very moment, you will fish for people. Now, we live in a culture where people change jobs like they change their underwear. People go from one job to the other. They move around. They do different careers. But this was a culture in which if you were born to be a fisherman, because your daddy was a fisherman, and your granddaddy was a fisherman, and your granddaddy's daddy was a fisherman, back generations and generations, you were born to be a fisherman, or you were born to be a carpenter, or you were born to be a farmer. Oh, wait a minute, that kind of applies to farmers, doesn't it? All right, what farmers, forget about that, but you're born into that. It's not just what you do, it's your identity. I'm not someone who fishes, I am a fisherman. This implies not only a change of identity, a break from the old, a change of vocation. He says, you were a fisherman. Now you will catch people. The word there, or in the NIV, it says you will fish for people, or you will catch people. And the word there in the Greek means to capture alive. You used to catch fish. Now you're going to capture people alive, bring them into life, bring them from death into life. You will capture them alive. And this encounter with Jesus puts Simon and his fishing companions in a position where they must make a choice. They see Jesus in a new way, and now they have to decide what they're going to do with that information. Now, they could go on as if nothing had changed. They could continue being fishermen. They got a pretty good stake there. They caught all these fish. That's going to keep them for quite a while. They could buy new boats. They could buy new nets. They could set up, They could go on as if nothing had changed. They could do what a lot of people do when they encounter Jesus or when they have a new understanding of Jesus, and that's run away. Now, Peter didn't run away. He said to Jesus, go away. Now, Jesus didn't say to Peter, leave, Peter. You're a sinful man. I can't deal with you. You can't be around me. Leave, Peter. He says, no, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Or they could completely change direction and fulfill God's will for their lives. The word, not here in the Greek, but it's the word that we've come across before in the preaching of, say, John the Baptist. Repent, metanoia, change your mind, change your direction. You were going one way, now turn and go in a different direction. And Jesus says to these men who are fishermen, he says, you will now metanoia, you will now go in a different direction. Once you were fishing for fish, now you will fish for people. Now you will catch people. Verse 11b, the second part of verse 11, is their choice. They pulled their boats up on the shore, left everything, and followed Jesus. Now think about that. They left everything. They left the boats. They left the nets. They left the fish. They left everything and followed Jesus. But I don't believe that Jesus' abundant provision went to waste here. Now again, this is a little sanctified imagination, but I think that great catch of fish was used to provide for their families. I think it's important that we don't misapply this passage. It doesn't mean we need to abandon our family and drop all of our responsibilities. Peter had a wife. We know that because he had a mother-in-law. And later on we will hear from Paul that when he traveled, his wife went with him. So